I'm Carol Anne Riddell, and welcome to Book It. We kick off our new season with a topic a lot of us are talking about: social media, and how much is too much, especially when it comes to our kids. Joining us today is Alaimo, author of Over the Influence: Why Social Media is Toxic for Women and Girls and How We Can Take It Back. Cara, thanks so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
So it is such an important topic, and certainly one that I think about a lot as a mom to daughters. I know you have daughters too. Is that part of what motivated you to write this book?
It was. So there's this old saying that we write the books that we need to read.
Yes.
And I very much wrote this book because I was struggling to figure out how I was going to handle the social media use of my own young daughters.
Yeah.
But you know, I write frequently for CNN Opinion. And after I finished the book, I went for a walk with my editor. And we basically had a laugh about how naive I had been to think that my biggest problem was going to be dealing with my own daughter's social media use, because the shocking revelation that I had while researching this book is that my biggest problem, of course, is that my daughters are going to live in the world that social networks have wrought. And I think that what's happening on social media is making the offline world more dangerous for women and girls.
I know, and you do get into that in your book. One of the things that struck me at the very beginning of the book is that you talk about how many children are a part of social media long before they've ever consciously made that decision. And that's on us, their
That's
parents.
right.
Sharenting.
Exactly.
So explain what you mean.
So we as parents are sharing sonogram photos and pictures of our kids growing up, sometimes in diapers or anecdotes of their embarrassing misdeeds. And I really call on parents to think thoughtfully about what we share and to remember that our kids are watching. And so they are learning to please other people, right? When we take these pictures and share them with audiences. But there's also the worry that, you know, this could affect my daughter's future presidential campaign.
Right.
And we don't know how these things are going to be used potentially out of context in the future. But one thing we do know is that girls and women in particular are judged uncharitably and unforgivingly, even for minor mistakes or for silly things.
Do girls, generally speaking, get bullied online more than boys?
Yes, and part of the problem is girls spend more time online because they care more about relationships. They also spend more time on these visually oriented apps like Instagram, where they kind of beat themselves up for their appearances and come to feel like they're less than. But because they're so relational and because they spend so much more time online, I think girls are particularly prone to problems of cyberbullying.
And of course, you know, boys can also be potentially impacted negatively.
Of course.
But would you say that overall girls are more at risk?
Yes, and I'm more worried overall about girls on social networks because, again, girls are spending more time on social networks and they're more focused on their bodies, right?
That I do want to touch on that. What does the research tell us about girls, social media, and body image?
So the research is mixed, and some of it comes down to how girls use it, right? So we see some girls who are sucked down these rabbit holes, and we see other girls using social media in healthy ways. But overall, I think it's fair to conclude that it is not a great idea for girls to spend hours and hours on Instagram looking at the so-called Instagram body, which you and I know can usually only be achieved through surgery.
Or airbrushing, or, you know,
Exactly.
filtering that photo, whatever it is.
Exactly.
Yeah. One of the things I was also struck by in the book is you say the average child is on social media by, I think it was age 12.
12.6.
Very, very specific, Cara. And yet the part of the brain that controls decision making is nowhere near fully mature at that point, which is a little scary. But what are the practical implications of that?
Well, one is, so the brain doesn't fully mature until around age 25. And in particular, the part of the brain that's still developing at that age is the part that like makes decisions and that thinks, oh, that bad consequence could actually happen to me. So a girl sends a sext thinking, but the bad things won't really happen to me, not thinking, I could be prosecuted for sharing child pornography. This could end up on the internet and make it difficult for me to date or get a job in the future. Or I could be sextorted by someone who's asking for this image, and then the next message that comes through is Venmo me $25,000 in the next hour, or I'm sending this to all your friends. And so they're not fully thinking through the consequences.
Yeah. And so we can't really expect them to make the appropriate decision in that moment.
That's exactly it.
One of the young women that you talk to in the book refers to how there's never a break. So you go home and you're thinking about what you posted or what you will post or how people are going to react to what you post. There does seem to be a different kind of constancy to the pressure of this. Is that right?
I think that's exactly right. So when I was growing up as a teenager, I got 17 magazine, and I read it once a month when it came to my mailbox, and then I was done with it. I didn't spend the rest of the month staring at those bodies and thinking about how to beautify myself.
Interesting point.
But here, girls are constantly bombarded, and just the fact that they have to stage their lives for other people on their social app is such a time suck. It's practically a full-time job on top of all the other things they need to be doing at this stage of life.
Yeah, that does raise the point also about there does seem to be this curation of life for social media.
That's right. And so everyone's left feeling like they don't measure up because everyone else's life looks so glamorous.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that you talk about in the book that is particularly frightening is, of course, the concern around online predators and children. And I just want to reference one of the statistics you cite. Almost 1 in 3 girls between 13 and 17 has had a sexual interaction with an adult on social media. I mean, that is astounding because I think most parents would say, no way, not my kid.
That's exactly it. And so a lot of parents don't let their kids go to the mall or hang out with friends because they're worried about them getting injured in the offline world, when really your daughter could be up on TikTok having a far more dangerous experience.
And sometimes parents aren't even aware, right? Because there are the accounts for parent consumption, and then there are the other accounts.
The Finstas. So a lot of parents think that they're okay because they're following their daughter on Instagram.
Right.
But in reality, a lot of these kids of all genders have Finstas, which are accounts under a different name that their friends know so that their parents can't follow them. And one of the big things, of course, that we see girls doing is sexualizing themselves at shockingly young ages. Because
how young, Kara?
Like when they join social networks, right? So age 12, they come to realize that the easiest way to rack up likes and follows and engagement on social media is by making themselves look hot for pictures. That's what they learn.
That is young. Now, your book is not just delving into what happens with girls, it's also about adult women. I was very interested in your discussion around parenting and the idea of the momfluencers and the sanctimommies.
Oh my goodness.
Can you explain?
So I think we have to remember that if you are, say, a stay-at-home mom, it is very difficult to achieve any kind of validation in our culture. And so a lot of moms are going online and sharing content about how they're fabulous moms. And it might be a recipe for how to get your newborn to sleep through the night. And P.S., no newborns sleep through the night, right?
Exactly. I will attest to that.
Same. But you have these other moms consuming this content and feeling less than, feeling like, here's the recipe, why can't I follow it? I must be a failure, something is wrong with me. And you have the sanctimommies, right, who make other moms feel less than because their homes aren't pristine and their kids aren't wearing matching clothes and smiling happily for the camera.
Right.
And we all know that this content is curated. And, you know, I interviewed a lot of influencers who told me that they feel loads of pressure to project these perfect lives that they don't really have because that's the only way that they can earn money from brands. No one wants to buy products so that they can look like harried women with misbehaved kids and messy homes.
Who haven't gotten in a shower in that day.
Exactly.
No one wants to really put that out in the world, but maybe we should.
I know. Well, I do call on all of us to share more authentic content to show what parenting is really like. And I think that that would give permission to other moms to do the same.
You know, we have to point out that there are good things about social media. Certainly, it can provide community or support or friendship to people who might otherwise feel marginalized. In researching this book, I know you've dug into all of these ramifications, but what is something that you would say is a really positive side of it.
So social networks are absolutely places where we find jobs, where we connect with other women in our fields, where we get involved in important causes. And so I reject this idea that women should leave social networks because they're so toxic. I think the only answer is to fix what's wrong with social networks.
You offer a lot of advice in your book about how to deal with social media. And getting back to what we touched on in the beginning, one of the things you say is that we have to value privacy more for our children. But does that really mean sort of resisting every adorable baby picture?
So we can have a debate about this. I personally share pictures of my kids in closed groups, so on Facebook with friends who I've approved. And the reason I do it is because I think it's great that my daughters have cousins in Sicily and friends and family all over the world who feel invested in them,
and
who feel like they know them and are watching them grow up. And I think that's beautiful.
Of course, as parents, we're supposed to be role models for our children, ideally in everything. But how does that translate in social media? What would you tell me to do to have my children see me do?
So this is painful, but of course, getting off our phones ourselves, right? And I think it's a good idea to establish practices that all of us, our children and ourselves, will follow in consultation with our kids, because our kids will have very practical, good ideas. And I think every family is different. So a lot of families say, well, we don't use phones at the dinner table. In my household, my husband works a lot of evenings and a lot of weekends. We have phones on the table all the time so that we can FaceTime him into dinner when he's able to step away from his patients. And that's beautiful for us. So what works for one family can be totally different from what works for another family. We might say kids don't use phones when they're doing homework, but they might need their phone to do some research for an assignment, right? We might break all the rules when a family member is sick and we're waiting for updates. And so I think flexibility and grace and generosity are called for, but in general, I try to look my kids in the eye and have conversations with them.
Yeah, well, that's certainly good advice. Cara, just a final question for you. What is one tip you would have for all of us, regardless of age, in terms of managing social media in our lives?
I would love to see all of us follow more women. So one of the things I learned while researching this book is that when women use social networks to try to bolster our professional profiles, we often end up with fewer followers, fewer reposts, and fewer resulting opportunities than the men in our fields. Because when people picture experts, they picture men and they turn to men. But that is something we could all change overnight. And so I would ask all of your listeners to follow 10 more women today.
All right, that we will do. Thank you so much for all this time. Really interesting stuff.
My pleasure.
All right, thank you, Cara. Next up, a new segment on Book It. CUNY TV's Isabel Ortiz is joining us as a regular contributor. Isabel is a big reader with a fresh perspective. She'll be interviewing authors and talking books in our podcast studio, and we are so excited to have her. Let's head there now.
Hi everyone, I'm Isabel Ortiz and welcome to Breaking Books, where we'll explore the stories and inspirations behind the books. Today I am thrilled to be joined by YA romance author Tashie Bhuiyan to speak about her latest book, Stay With My Heart. Hi Tashie, thank you so much for being here today.
Of course, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I just have to say, your book, Stay With My Heart, had me on an emotional roller coaster, to say the least. I felt sad when Liana felt sad. I felt when she was having anxiety. I felt that anxiety right alongside her. But also, I was blushing and kicking my feet at the moment of the budding relationship between Liana and Sky. But I just want to hear from you a little bit about the book.
Yeah, so Stay With My Heart is my third book. It follows a girl, Liana, who basically accidentally sabotages a local upcoming boy band and realizes how badly she's messed up and tries to fix her mistake, and in the process, maybe falls in love and gains a little found family.
Okay. Yeah, so this book, you can tell throughout the whole book, it's laced with a passion for music. From the characters itself, it's literally like a fangirl's biggest dream to be involved in a boy band in some way, somehow. But from the characters themselves to the character, Liana's main passion is music. And then to the titles of the chapters themselves, you have everybody from Olivia Rodrigo, Taylor Swift, and Pink Floyd. Why did you make it that music was such a strong element in this book?
So I think like there's been a part of me that's always wanted to write a book that's kind of like a love letter to music, because I feel like when I was growing up, like music was what was like saving my life. Like, you know, like having those songs, having those bands, like having those moments where like I just felt this sense of community. And I think the way that music can also bring people together is really beautiful to me. I feel like a lot of my friends are friends that I've made at concerts or I've met like at events and etc. And like we happen to have the same love for like an artist or a band or whoever, and that like led to like such a beautiful friendship that is bigger than the music, but music plays such a big part in it at the same time.
You speak too about how this book had to be more than just a romance, and you see this in your main character. She is dealing with this profound grief of losing her mother. She's dealing with anxiety and depression. Is it challenging to write those scenes, or is it kind of cathartic for you as an author?
I think that when it comes to like the mental health, it almost feels natural. Like, you know, like I almost don't even have to think about it as much because it just feels natural for her as a character and me as a writer. Because I think that for me, it's just really important to talk about mental health and to get rid of that stigma and normalize it, especially for young teenagers who are picking up the book, the like audience, and also older people who pick up the book. Like, I think that in general, we don't talk enough about mental health, or like when we do, it's very much like stereotyped and not like nuanced, you know? But I also think like, you know, I think about 16-year-old Tashie. And I think about how she was kind of alone on her mental health journey, you know? And now I have resources like therapy or like medication if I need it and etc. But like back then, like that wasn't really within reach. So I think that having a book like this for her might have meant so much. And I think that I always want to make that younger version of me proud.
I know that for myself, for a long time, I felt like I was maybe too old to read YA novels, being that I am 22, but you wouldn't think that, but I don't know, that's how I felt.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very normal way that people feel because they feel like they've aged out of it, or like, you know, like it's like kiddie. But I think that there's a lot of depth to YA novels, and in a way that's more accessible sometimes than adult books, just because by virtue of the fact that they are for a younger audience, you want them to feel like, you know, a 15-year-old could pick it up and still like follow the entire story and like relate to it. And I think that the older you get, those experiences of being a teenager don't go away.
So I know in Stay With My Heart and your book before Stay With My Heart, there was these characters who had artistic passion. So I know in A Show for Two, it was filmmaking, and Stay With My Heart, it's music.
Yeah.
So in your future projects, do you kind of see that being a theme that runs throughout your books that you come out with?
100%. And Carrying On With You too, she wants to be like a poet. I think that, you know, art speaks to me on such a deep level. And I think that there's so many ways that you can tackle art, so many things. I'm currently working on a project that's doesn't even have a book deal or anything. Like, you know, like I'm just writing it. It's my like first draft kind of thing, where there's two main characters and one of them is really into glass blowing and the other is a music producer. But they're both like artistic fields and they feel really passionate about their hobbies and like their enjoyment of it. And I think that for me, like that's like just something that I can really relate to. And I think that's why it comes naturally to me to write it. But I also think if I had to write like a character who's really into STEM, I would have to do so much research because I don't really know anything like that. I'd have to go down like so many rabbit holes of like, I don't know what rocket science really entails. Like,
Yeah. Astrophysics, what's that? I
like,
don't get it.
like
Yeah.
so true. Not my business.
But yeah, that glass blowing music producer, I can't wait to read that when you come out with it. But I just want to say thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was a great time.
Now to the fine print, and another important topic as we start the academic year. Too many city children are not reading at grade level. Here to talk about what we can do to change that is Emily Marchese, the executive director of Reach Out and Read of Greater New York. Emily, thanks so much for coming by today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So for starters, explain to us a little bit about how Reach Out and Read works, because it's such an interesting model. You're getting books to children through their pediatricians.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so we were founded 25 years ago in New York City, and we train medical professionals on early literacy and anticipatory guidance so that at every well child visit from 6 months to 5 years old, so there's about 10 appointments in that time span, the pediatricians are trained on early literacy. So they're working with the parent and the caregiver in that appointment to give them advice on reading to their child every night. And then they also receive from Reach Out and Read a new developmentally appropriate, linguistically appropriate book to hand to the parent in that well child visit, so that by the time the child turns 5 years old, they'll have at least 10 books in their home library.
And by that time, they've also heard, the parent has heard over and over again, this is important.
Absolutely. And they've gotten advice that's appropriate to that stage.
Yes.
So if it's a baby, it's completely appropriate for the baby to chew on the book. We love to see it. If they're 3 years old, we can give suggestions for questions to ask to get a conversation started while you read the book.
And one of the things that your organization says is that when a young child does not have a regular reading ritual, meaning a parent or a caregiver reading aloud to them, they can be at a real disadvantage even before kindergarten. How so?
Absolutely. Well, 90% of brain development in a child starts before the age of 5. So parents can never underestimate their importance as a child's first teacher. And so developing a ritual where you're reading to your child every night is incredibly impactful. We see families that go through the Reach Out and Read program have as much of a 3 to 6 month vocabulary advantage when the child starts kindergarten through going through that model and keeping up with the daily practice.
So how early should we be reading to our kids?
You really can't start too early. You can start in utero. We do recommend it. Your child gets used to hearing your voice.
Yeah.
And that's so important in terms of bonding and developing that feeling of love and safety as you are read to. You can't start early enough.
Well, that's good advice. That's good advice. So how does reading aloud, or the lack of it, translate later on in terms of academic success for a child? And I'm talking about when they do get to those grade levels where we're measuring their ability to read.
Starting strong is absolutely key, because it's really difficult to catch up once you start to fall behind. And we see that here in New York City, where 51% of third graders are not reading at grade level. And there was a landmark study done by the Annie E. Casey Foundation that showed that if you're not reading at grade level at third grade, you're 4 times more likely to not graduate from high school. So it is really important to keep up, and even doing small what seems like a small thing in reading to your child every night is really giving them that huge boost forward.
Wow, that's really some startling numbers there. So we know that making reading together a priority is not easy for every family, and some of these issues that we're talking about are even more pronounced in areas of concentrated poverty. Can you tell us a little bit about that disparity?
We see many of our families that go through Reach Out and Read do not have any books at home. And oftentimes if a family is struggling to put food on the table, books are not a necessity. That's something that, can be cut from a daily budget when times are tough. And so having that ritual developed, it can be difficult to go to the library and read and check out the books and have that on hand. So having the books available, whether you're receiving them through the doctor's office, through us, or by being able to go to the library, is really important to be able to make that time at home. It can be really challenging for families.
Yeah, sure can, I'm sure. So let's talk about 35 for 35, which is a new campaign, a new project, and the goal is to bring thousands of books to medical clinics around the country. Do I have that right?
Yes,
Including here in New York.
That's absolutely true.
So tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, we're so excited. So Reach Out and Read National is turning 35 this year. So they partnered with Scholastic to have this debut collection of 35 beautiful, diverse books that will be supported by National, so that affiliates like Greater New York are able to purchase them at an incredibly affordable cost. And since it's Greater New York's 25th anniversary, we decided to purchase 25% of the total collection. So there's going to be almost 90,000 diverse books mailing out to hospitals and clinics all over New York City. These books really represent the diversity of the communities that we are in. So there's incredible diversity in terms of family structures, in terms of own voices, in terms of the racial and ethnic breakdown of the families and the children represented. So really they provide incredible windows and doors and mirrors for children to look into. They'll see themselves represented, and they'll also see other families that they go to school with and are in community with.
And I have to imagine that that really fosters or can foster a love of reading, because if you can identify with a character in a book, it's going to make you more likely to turn to a book.
Absolutely. When the character looks just like you, that can be so affirming to a young child. And it's also very respectful to the families who are making this commitment to invest their time with their child. When they see that they are represented in the books that we're providing, that shows them a great respect.
So all in across the country, how many books will be getting out as part of this program?
350,000 books. It's incredibly exciting.
That's really terrific. So Emily, just a last question for you. If you had one suggestion or one thing that you want parents to know about why it's so important to read aloud with your children, what would that be?
I would say you are your child's first teacher, so do not be afraid to do it imperfectly. Worry more about the consistency. So I would say if you're struggling with your own literacy, or if it's difficult for you to read in English, make up a story as you're turning the pages. If you're exhausted after a long day of work and your child brings a book that has a ton of pages in it, it's okay to skip a few pages, right? No one's going to tell.
I've done that.
No one's going to tell. The most important thing is that you do it, so it's okay to do it imperfectly. If it's from you and with love, your child will soak that up.
All right, what wonderful advice. Emily, thank you so much for your time and for coming by today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really appreciate it. Next, we are going to head over to author and columnist Linda Stasi. As always, she has plenty to say about what she's reading in Uncensored.
I ask you seriously, who doesn't love a rip-roaring book about quantum mechanics? Commies, fascists, and dopes, that's who. Well, I just read two of them. No, not head-exploding books about theory. One is a very funny novel, and one is a serious quest for answers about life after life. Well, they both might still make your head explode, but it won't be from boredom, that's for sure. First, I bring you an oldie but a greatie by the hilarious Irish author Paul Murray. It's called Skippy Dies, about a boys' boarding school. No, I won't be giving away the plot by telling you that, yes, Skippy does die, which isn't really even what the book's about. It's about the funny side of quantum physics, turn-of-the-century mysticism, teenage angst, and sexual braggadocio by virginal boys who pretend they have more sex and more often than all of the Kardashians put together. There are also Irish fairy folk tales and creating dual universes out of old video games and tinfoil. Well, that might not sound like it's a laugh riot. It is. It's also, unfortunately, about 100 pages too long, I think, but it's a great read nonetheless. In fact, if you haven't yet read Paul Murray, this is a great introduction to a world populated by the wackos that reside in Murray's brain. Now, however, I want to warn you that I'm also not giving anything away by telling you that author Sebastian Junger doesn't die either in his new memoirish book, In My Time of Dying. The title comes from a passage in Psalms and was a popular folk song by Blind Willie Johnson and then by Bob Dylan and Led Zeppelin. The book focuses on how Junger, who had several near-death experiences as a war correspondent and extreme sportsman, had an aneurysm in which he did, or perhaps didn't, die. He writes that his dead father, the physicist, came into the hospital and talked to him, telling him, "It's okay, I'll take care of you, come with me." Junger was brought back after almost completely bleeding out. But then he started going nuts when he came home. He wasn't sure if he was actually dead or not. This brought about the exploration of life after death. He still doesn't have the definitive answer. Okay, I'm now going to admit it. I do have the answer in photos I took of my dead friend who came to see me 4 months after she died. I called Junger's publicist to tell her to have him get in touch with me, but it must have fallen on deaf ears because, well, I never heard from him. The book from the guy who brought you The Perfect Storm is still very interesting, even for someone who has photos of her dead friend. So Junger, if you're watching this, give me a holler. Let's talk. For Uncensored, I'm Linda Stasi.
That wraps up another chapter for us. Thanks so much for watching. A quick reminder to check us out on the CUNY TV app and on social. Let us know what you're reading. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. See you next time on Book It.